Friday the 13th Part 3. Released in 1982, there was some talk of this movie being the finale of the Friday the 13th trilogy, something that will become a bit of a running gag as we go along. Part 3 was also filmed with a particular gimmick in mind. Can you guess what it was? Unlike current 3D movies, the 3D movies of this era definitely made more of an effort to put in scenes with no other purpose than to make use of the 3D effect. And to be honest, I'm kinda disappointed that the 2000s 3D craze is over and my TV is actually too new to have built-in 3D capabilities, so I couldn't enjoy the goofiness in all its glory. While this film definitely made money, 82 was starting to move into the golden age of 80s horror movies, and it had a lot more competition to deal with, such as Poltergeist, Creepshow, The Thing, Halloween 3, Amityville 2, and The Last Unicorn. After the kinda what the fuck ending of Part 2, I was surprised to find that this movie is meant to follow directly on from it, as in, it happens the very next day, something I would never have realized from just watching the movie itself. Jason attacks a local store as a gaggle of horny teens led by final girl Chris Higgins take a road trip to the holiday house. While at another local shop, two of the kids upset a trio of bikers who later track them down and attempt to siphon gas from their truck, only to have Jason, hiding out in the barn and recovering from his injuries from Part 2, murder them good. That night, Jason gets antsy and begins to pick off the kids one by one. Chris and her boyfriend are out for a walk and she recounts to him the tale of why she ran away from this area years ago. Upon returning to the house, they find their friends dead and Jason attacks once again, killing the boyfriend and cornering Chris in the barn. Jason gets distracted by one of the bikers long enough for Chris to land the death blow with an axe. She launches a boat into the middle of the lake where she thinks she sees Jason moving around, but is suddenly pulled into the lake by a decaying woman's body, events that are revealed to be imaginary. Part 3 feels a lot like it's refined some of the core elements of the first two movies, but can't help but mangle others. One big issue for me is that after the confusing ending of Part 2, we now have this young woman who has a much older looking boyfriend. She's talking about going back to the lake to face her fears about a horrible event that happened earlier. So naturally, I assumed that this was meant to be the main character of Part 2, Ginny, carrying on her story. But no, she's a whole different character, and the event she's going back to face is that 2 years ago, after a fight with her parents, she ran into the woods and was attacked by a disfigured man who, surprise surprise, turned out to be Jason. The kids in this movie are much better than the last two in that they are made much more distinct. The girl who ends up being the final girl is more or less pointed out as the main protagonist from the start, and it's hinted at early that she has some sort of backstory or relationship to the crazy events that go on at Crystal Lake. So her role in the movie feels much less random chance than other protagonists did. You also have these two stoner hippies who, while it's never explained how or why these obvious 30-somethings are hanging around with these kids, they do add variety to the group. There's also this character called Shelly. Unlike the pretty jock male characters we've had so far, Shelly is introduced as being nerdy and pudgy, and he fully realizes that he's not the sort of boy that most girls go for. To try and get attention and make himself more memorable, he likes to play pranks and use masks and props, but this usually ends up annoying the people more than anything. But while trying to get close to Vera, his blind date, they run afoul of a few bikers at the store. But before leaving, he grows a pair and knocks over their bikes with his car. A feat that actually impresses Vera. Shelly is definitely the character with the most character development and almost has a full character arc. He has self-doubt and acts goofy in a way that pushes people away. But he starts to realize that Vera might like him a little if he played less pranks and stood up for himself more often. Shelly is then murdered unceremoniously off camera before we can see if he ever got his shit together, and if he could ever get the girl. This is kind of a big failing of the movie. If you're gonna go through the trouble of giving so much information and development to kill fodder, at least make their death memorable. This is also the first time that Jason dons the legendary hockey mask. Apparently, the producers wanted Jason to have some sort of mask to hide his face after the bag on the head approach of Part 2 failed. During one of the lighting tests, they just grabbed a goalkeeper mask out of one of the crew members' bags that was on hand, and the production team decided they liked it. So, what's the epic way they introduced this iconic symbol into the movie canon? Shelly, the nerd, just has it with him at one point, and after Jason kills him, he just decides to take it and start wearing it. It's a legendary tale indeed. The kills get turned up a notch in this movie, and a couple of them rate amongst my favorites of the series. One of the kids, who for some reason loves walking on his hands after getting laid, gets chopped from the crotch downwards and is later seen stuck to the ceiling, folded over like fucking laundry. Chris's older boyfriend also gets his head squashed like a melon and his eyes pop out. A first in showing that Jason's strength is above normal, and a technique he will favor throughout the series. The best one, however, is the first time you ever see Jason wearing his hockey mask. He emerges from the fog, and Vera, the girl Shelley was set up with and was trying to prank with the mask earlier, at first thinks it's him before realizing it's not and starts to freak out. Jason takes aim with a spear gun and plunges it through her eye from 50 meters away. It may not be the bloodiest kill of all time, but Jason's eerie entrance and the skill needed for the shot make it a memorable one. The ending of this movie, along with Chris's overall character arc, is where the movie just doesn't get it right. Chris opens the movie ominously talking about the events that forced her away and that she now bravely returns to face it. And it turns out all it was that she was grappled by an ugly dude for all of 30 seconds. I know in real life this would be traumatizing, but in this universe, it's really small potatoes. And right at the end, Jason does this really weird thing where he lifts up his mask to reveal his face, just so Chris knows that it's the same person from that time. But since he's already slaughtered all of her friends and almost killed her by this point, it really doesn't make it any more personal. The only reason Chris survives Jason's last attack is that one of the bikers returns to try and take Jason out, a character that we very clearly see get hacked to death earlier. And of course, the very end replays the ending of the first movie, only reversing it so that it's a rotting Mrs. Voorhees that attacks the girl in the boat rather than Jason. There's no setup to this and there's no payoff, making it just an odd little nod to the first movie rather than anything that happens for a reason. As I said, there was a possibility that this was to be the last Friday movie, and it seems by all accounts that Jason was mortally wounded in this last encounter. The fake out ending makes it possible he'll come back, but the final shot shows Jason's corpse not moving as we fade to black. Was Jason going to find a way to return? Stay tuned for the final chapter.